This video is about the difference between the MS441 piston and cylinders and the Farmertech big bore cylinder. You can see that I've got a selection of both OEM and aftermarket. This one I just recently got. This is the newest big bore piston kit from Farmertech. I've run these in the past and they were obviously chrome, and the coating and the ports were definitely not what I would consider high-tech equipment, but I have run one, and it's been run at least for the last 2 years, and I just had the muffler off, and the piston and cylinder are still in good shape. Okay, let's talk about these. So what I have here is the oldest model of the 441 cylinder I have. This cylinder is marked Gilardani, and it appears to be an 06 maybe. It's got a 6 cast into the date mark, and there's the Stihl signature. This piston and cylinder came off of a saw that was in the junkyard. It's got a ruined exhaust port mount, and the spark plug hole was stripped out, something that's fairly common among these early cylinders. You can see the coating is still in good shape. The ports are even, and the combustion chamber has kind of a rounded edge on it. They're a strong running saw in good shape. Here are the ports that travel up to feed your charge, and then here are your strato ports that feed into those 2 ports right above your main transfers. So this saw was the one that is carbureted, not M-tronic. And then I have a little bit of a newer version. You can see the color is different on the cylinder itself from the older one, and it only has the Stihl markings on it, no other manufacturer. So not sure what the BR means, but this cylinder seems to be more refined, and I haven't heard about the spark plug problems that the earlier ones had. And you can see that the combustion chamber has more of a stepped edge on it, and which gives it a flatter squish band. So it's pretty apparent when you look down inside of them. So here is the newer one with the very sharp edge of the squish band, and then this is the rounded edge. And the port shapes are pretty nice on both of them. They swept down right beside the cylinder extension into the bore. The intakes, of course, are all the same. There's not much room between the cylinder skirt, or the cylinder port, and the skirt of the piston. Get a shot of the exhaust on these. Here's the older one, here's the newer one. Basically it's the same, except the squish band in the newer one is definitely more refined. As far as the Farmertech goes, this is a 52 millimeter bore, which steps you up to a 76.5, 77 cc saw from the normal 50 millimeter port saw, which is a 70 cc saw. So the earlier model I had looked like it was cast by someone's foot with the spark plug hole and ports stabbed in with an ice pick into the chrome. It was pretty sharp and had a lot of unbeveled edges, but this one seems to be a lot better. I mean, it's more refined. It's got better machining on it. The exhaust port is smaller appearing than the factory ones, but you can certainly take a Dremel to it and grind it if need be. The intake port, of course, is exactly the same as the others. As I said before, there's not a whole lot of room. Now, the problem with most big bores is that the transfers are cast on the inside of the cylinder, and when you open up the bore, it intrudes into that transfer area, effectively reducing the area of the transfer. But the 441 Strato saw has its ports transferred to the outside of the cylinder and are fed from the bottom of the case up through the cylinder and then exit through those two top transfers. And then you have your Strato right there and that closest port to the intake. And what that does is it charges the fuel mix with fresh air and makes the saw more efficient. They do have very good torque and a lot of power, but as you can see, this cylinder, the skirt that extends down into your saw is much thinner than the factory. So the area removed from this cylinder is basically from the bore itself, not intruding into a transfer space, because that's in a different area. So they reduce the inside of this bore, which effectively doesn't go into this area, which should mean that the transfer tunnels are pretty similar in size to the factory. And now I always shape these a little bit and slope them. It doesn't give you a whole lot of room here on this thinner skirt, but it certainly does give you some area to remove, unlike a traditional piston port, which has bottom fed here and then your top. So this should be a pretty good design for this particular saw. I'm not saying that big bores are good for every saw, because I don't believe they are. But something else I wanted to point out is, look at that. That's a very nice squish band. Very flat, well finished. It's not hideously cast like my first one was, and the coating doesn't appear to be the same chrome. I mean, I'm not sure if this is Nicosil or not, but the first one was looked like a 57 Buick bumper, and the chrome was thick and shattered at the spark plug and decomp hole. But that's a nice flat squish band, and the combustion chamber is much smaller than the original factory one. So this thing should really have a lot of compression. But I plan on using this on an M-tronic build to see how the M-tronic handles the bigger bore and how it will react. So one of the things about a big bore is that on my first one, the dimensions of the ports where the spark plug and decomp hole shifts because of the size of the bore. And as you can see, here's your decomp hole, and here's one here, and then in the top cover of the saw is a cutout for this decomp and the spark plug. And one of the things, the first big bore kit I used was that this hole was misaligned with the top cover of the saw. It's not so bad that it will stop the decomp from opening or closing, but it could still be a concern because if the top cover keeps this from closing, it could burn up the saw. Okay, let's talk about the pistons. Here is an early piston from the non-Mtronic saw. And you can see the strato cutouts in it and the transfers. Here's the intake side. As you can see, it's very narrow, so there's not a lot of room to widen, if at all, the intake port. They're a fairly heavy piston. As you can see, the casting's quite thick, and that's to make room for the transfer and strato cutouts in the piston itself. They're a nice piston, and they're cast very well. Here is the Mtronic piston. You can see that they kind of refined this piston just a little bit with the newer models. It's got better machining, and like I said, this piston is used. It wasn't a hard run saw, and there was nothing wrong with the Mtronic, but it was used by a tree care service who the fellows burned up a lot of saws every year, and so they weren't fastidious about their maintenance. But it's a well cast piston, and this one's got the pin in it. And then this is the big bore piston, which is, it feels lighter in the hand, and the strato port in the piston appears to be more sharp edged and narrow. It's not beveled or as wide as the OEM. So I'm not sure how much of a difference that will make, because the piston's 52 millimeter. It's just basically wider. It's not any other difference, and you can see that it's just a touch bigger than the OEM. So, but this piston is just about like every other Chinese piston, except it takes a little bit more skill to get this right. It's still kind of thick, but the material is actually lighter than the OEM, which I wouldn't say it's stronger. The underneath of the OEM, the original carbureted one, seems to have just a very smooth cast underneath it. It's an excellent piston. It's a shame that these saws were discontinued because they had a lot of innovation and ran really well. So, as you can see, these have a little mark in the front of the piston right there, and it's a little bit more narrow and pronounced in the aftermarket. But it doesn't seem to be a terrible casting. I mean, it's just a little bit different with the more sharp edge and the strato port in the saw. And everything seems to be aligned fairly well. Ooh, don't roll. Ooh. So let's can take a look at the ring lands between the two, and can really see the difference in the strato port there. So one of the things about the 441 is the misconception that, the first strato saw were difficult to tune, and make run right. And I think there was some problems with the original cylinder. It was, I see a lot of these with the spark plug hole blown out, and which would be extremely frustrating in the field if you were doing a job with one of these saws and had to pull a flooded plug only to strip it out. So regardless, these are an excellent strong saw. I have a big bore carbureted that seems to tune and run just fine. I run a 32-inch bar on it. It doesn't seem to have much problem pulling that bar. And then I have an M-tronic, all OEM. There's no aftermarket support for these saws except for the piston and cylinder kit. And there might be one or two other pieces that I'm unaware of. But I run a 28-inch full comp bar on that OEM M-tronic, and it has no problem cutting most trees that I'm into. So that's the video, and hopefully this gives you a better understanding. And you know, this aftermarket cylinder is a lot better looking than the original one that I bought 3 years ago. So there are some improvements, and you know, it's something to consider, is that they still make advances, and maybe the sales were not good. And I've never bought one of the high-end big bore kits, so I don't have those compared to. I know that there's used to be a Titan or a Tincacell that was released, but I haven't seen it. And honestly, with the problems of that coating coming off if you grind on it, I was really not interested in playing with one of those. So thank you, and have a good day.